Luxor, Egypt, 1924. Archaeologist Daniel Weaver ran a hand over the worn linen-wrapped mummy before him. His heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. Was this really happening? After all these years of fruitless searching, could he actually have found the mythical lost tomb of the first prophet? According to legend, it was hidden beneath the sands of Luxor, concealed from the world for thousands of years. And now here he was, staring into the dark abyss that was its entrance. He adjusted his headlamp, its beam dancing across the countless hieroglyphs carved into the chamber walls. Some were symbols of power, wealth, and the gods. Others depicted scenes from the life of a pharaoh. But there was one symbol he couldn't decipher. It looked like an hourglass filled with writhing serpents, and everywhere he saw the same strange hieroglyph. His skin crawled. The air hung heavy and unmoving, like the space had been sealed off from the outside world for millennia. Daniel felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. This wasn't just another archaeological dig. No, this was his magnum opus. Finding this tomb would make his career. It might even change history. But why did it feel like he was committing sacrilege? He pushed the feeling aside. Superstitions were for the uneducated. He was a scientist. He dealt in facts, not fairy tales. So, with a deep breath and a determined set to his jaw, he entered the tomb. The air inside was stagnant and frigid, causing the moisture from Daniel's headlamp to freeze in the air and drift down onto his face like icy needles. He pulled his sweater tighter around him, ignoring the way it strained against his impressive gut. He wasn't built for spelunking, but by God, he wasn't about to turn back now. As he moved deeper into the tomb, he noticed more of the strange symbols. They seemed to mock him, their meaning just out of reach. Then he came to a chamber unlike anything he'd seen before. In the center sat a sarcophagus made of solid gold, encrusted with jewels that glittered even in the dim light. And on its surface were those strange hourglass hieroglyphs, pulsing as if alive. Daniel froze. A sudden gust of wind slammed the tomb door shut with a resounding boom. He spun around, panic constricting his throat. Had someone else found the tomb? Was someone else hiding in the shadows watching him? He called out, his voice echoing eerily in the confined space. But there was no reply. He tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. It was jammed shut, trapped. Daniel began to hyperventilate, his mind racing. What if he died in here? Would his body ever be found? Would anyone even know he'd been here? Or would he simply become another nameless explorer lost to the sands of time? Then he noticed something. On the floor in front of the door, a small sliver of moonlight had managed to penetrate the darkness and illuminate a series of markings. They were almost invisible, yet Daniel felt compelled to follow them. As he crept closer, he realized they were footprints, leading away from the door and into the darkness. Someone, or something, had walked this way recently. But how? If the tomb had been sealed for thousands of years, then how could someone have gotten in and out without being detected? Curiosity overwhelmed him, and he followed the footprints deeper into the tomb. They led him through a labyrinth of tunnels until finally he came to another chamber. In the center sat a massive stone monolith, adorned with the same hourglass hieroglyph. But as Daniel stepped closer, he realized the symbol wasn't carved into the stone. No, it was a gaping hole. And from within it, a soft glow emanated, beckoning him forward. He hesitated. Something told him to stay away, but he couldn't resist the allure of the unknown. With a deep breath, he reached out and touched the hieroglyph. The moment his fingers made contact, the monolith rumbled to life. The ground shook as the chamber began to spin, faster and faster, until Daniel was a helpless passenger in a whirlwind of stone and dust. He closed his eyes, bracing for impact, but it never came. When he opened them again, he was somewhere else. Gone was the familiar darkness of the tomb. Instead, he stood in a vast cavern, illuminated by an ethereal blue light. Before him stretched an endless desert dotted with ancient pyramids, and the river Nile snaked through the landscape like a silver ribbon. But something was wrong. There shouldn't have been any light. Daniel spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing to be found. Then he heard a voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It said, "Welcome, Daniel Weaver, to the Hall of Records. I have been waiting for you." Confused, Daniel asked, "Who's there? Show yourself." But the only reply was silence. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet began to shake. The sky crackled with energy, and a pillar of light shot down from above, striking the monolith. The world dissolved into blinding white. Then everything went black. When Daniel regained consciousness, he found himself lying on the cold stone floor, disoriented and weak. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. He struggled to sit up, his head pounding like a drum. Where was he? What had happened? Then he saw the answer. Around him lay the broken pieces of the monolith, shattered into 1,000 fragments. And on the wall above him, scrunched into a tight ball, was the last remaining piece. As he watched, horrified, it writhed and twisted, reforming itself into the same hourglass hieroglyph he'd seen throughout the tomb. Daniel scrambled back, knocking over a pile of rocks. The noise echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the unseen walls. Startled, he pressed himself against the ground, listening intently. Footsteps. Someone was coming. He didn't have time to think about what to do next. In a panic, he grabbed a fallen chunk of monolith, hiding behind a cluster of stalagmites. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by a low growl. Whatever was out there was big, very big. Then he saw it. Emerging from the darkness was a creature straight out of a nightmare. Its skin was the color of dried blood, and covered in scales that glistened under the dim light. Razor-sharp teeth protruded from its snarling jaws, and its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire. It slithered closer, its forked tongue flicking in and out. Daniel froze, paralyzed with fear. This was it. His end was here, and there was nothing he could do about it. The monster loomed over him, its hot fetid breath washing over his face, and then it spoke. Its voice was like gravel grinding on bone. So the prophecy is true. The first prophet has returned. It circled him, its gaze never leaving his. I have waited for you, Daniel Weaver. It is time for you to take your rightful place. Daniel stammered. What? I don't understand. The monster tilted its head, its eyes boring into his. You need not understand. You must only believe. It extended a clawed hand towards him. Join me, Daniel Weaver, and together we shall rule this realm and bring the old gods back to this world. What should he do? Join the monster and risk whatever horrors that entailed, or try to escape and possibly die trying? Either way, he knew he couldn't stay here. He had to do something. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and grabbed the outstretched hand. The monster roared with laughter, its voice echoing through the cavern. Excellent. Come, my prophet. It is time to go home. As they walked side by side into the swirling vortex of energy, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. One thing was certain, though. He would never forget this day. The day he discovered the lost tomb and unleashed an ancient evil upon the world.
He had always been fascinated by death. The macabre had been his niche on YouTube, where he'd gained fame for exploring abandoned hospitals and insane asylums. But now, Daniel was in Egypt. He was standing before a sealed tomb, an entrance carved into the side of a hill overlooking the desert. It was here that he would discover something that made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. Daniel wasn't alone. 3 men from a nearby village had agreed to lead him to this forgotten burial chamber. According to legend, it contained the tomb of an ancient pharaoh who was cursed. Daniel didn't believe in curses, but he loved a good mystery. And besides, how dangerous could a dead man be? As they approached, he noticed strange symbols carved into the stones, unlike anything he'd seen before. Some resembled hieroglyphs, while others looked disturbingly familiar, almost as if they were written in English. The locals refused to go any further. They told Daniel that anyone who trespassed inside would suffer the dreamless sleep and never wake again. Of course, he didn't listen. There was only one way to find out if there really was a curse, and Daniel was determined to uncover the truth. It took them over an hour to reach the entrance. The descent was steep and dangerous, but the thrill of the forbidden gave Daniel goosebumps. When he finally stepped inside, he found himself in a vast cavern filled with massive stone pillars. In the center stood a raised platform with what appeared to be a sarcophagus. Daniel cautiously approached, examining the strange symbols along the way. He realized they were not hieroglyphs, but a completely unknown script. Some of the markings were identical to those he'd seen outside, but what they meant remained a mystery. Then he noticed something even stranger. Near the base of the sarcophagus, someone had etched the name Sleeper in what appeared to be English. Was this the key to the tomb's secrets? What did it mean, and who was the sleeper? Daniel felt a growing sense of unease, but his curiosity was piqued. He pulled out his phone and shone the light on the sarcophagus. It was covered in intricate carvings depicting strange creatures and unknown symbols. Then he saw it. a small inscription hidden in the corner. Using his phone's flash, he deciphered the message. It read, "Beware, whoever disturbs the sleeper shall fall into a dreamless sleep." Was this the curse the villagers had spoken of? Was there a malevolent spirit guarding this tomb? As he explored further, he came across more inscriptions, each one adding to the mystery. One mentioned a great evil that must be contained, while another warned that the sleeper must never be awakened. He recorded every symbol in his notebook, determined to solve the puzzle. But he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He continued his exploration, descending deeper into the tomb. The air grew colder, and he could feel a strange presence all around him. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet gave way, and he found himself falling into a dark abyss. When he landed, he quickly realized that he was in a subterranean chamber, illuminated only by his phone's dim light. In the center of the room was a stone tablet covered in ancient script. Daniel examined it closely, realizing it was the same language he'd seen on the sarcophagus and throughout the tomb. He tried to decipher the message, but it was difficult. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed something peculiar. Some of the symbols looked similar to Egyptian hieroglyphs. With renewed determination, he compared them to a hieroglyphics chart he'd brought with him. Slowly but surely, he began to understand. The tablet told the story of a powerful sorcerer who had been entombed alive to prevent his curse from spreading. He was known as the Sleeper, and his tomb was filled with traps and puzzles to keep intruders at bay. But what was his curse, and why had he been buried in such a remote place? As Daniel pondered these questions, he noticed more symbols in the room. Some carved into the walls, and others scattered across the floor. They were the same markings he'd seen everywhere else in the tomb. Could they provide more clues about the Sleeper's curse? With his notebook, he began recording every symbol he found, hoping to find a connection between them. But as he delved deeper into his research, he realized that some of the symbols were not his own. He checked his notes, but couldn't remember writing them. Phrases like, "Do not wake him and beware the dreamless sleep," were scrawled across the pages in both English and ancient Egyptian. It was as if someone had been trying to warn him. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and he could feel a presence behind him. He turned slowly, expecting to see one of his friends, but the chamber was empty. Had he been hallucinating? He dismissed the thought, chalking it up to stress and fatigue. But as he continued his investigation, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was not alone. He examined the walls, searching for any other markings, and found a small indentation near the ceiling. It was too high for him to reach, so he used a stick to probe further. To his surprise, it was hollow. He pressed against it, and the wall slid open, revealing a secret passage. He entered cautiously, finding himself in a narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was stale, and he could hear dripping water echoing in the darkness. As he walked, he noticed strange symbols painted on the walls, the same ones that had appeared in his notebook. Were they a map leading him to the heart of the tomb? After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened up into a large chamber. In the center stood a sarcophagus, similar to the one he'd seen earlier. But this one was ornately decorated with scenes from ancient Egyptian mythology. Daniel approached it, drawn to its enigmatic presence. As he examined the sarcophagus, he noticed a small inscription on the lid. Using his phone's flashlight, he deciphered the message. It read, "Here lies the sleeper, cursed to roam the earth until his revenge is complete." So the curse was real. But who was the sleeper, and what was his revenge? He searched for more clues, finding a small opening behind the sarcophagus. He crawled through, emerging into a narrow passageway. At the end, he saw a faint light. With renewed hope, he pushed through, expecting to find another chamber. Instead, he emerged outside. When he looked back, he saw that the entrance to the passage had vanished. He was trapped. Panic began to set in. He had to find a way out before nightfall. But as he stumbled through the darkness, he noticed something strange. The ground beneath his feet was moving. He looked around in horror as the earth split open, revealing a gaping chasm. The sand beneath him shifted and he lost his balance. He reached out desperately, but there was nothing to hold on to. He was falling. When he landed, he found himself in a deep pit. The sides were smooth and slippery, making it impossible to climb out. And as he looked up, he saw that the entrance was too small for him to escape. He was trapped in a tomb, surrounded by the darkness of an ancient curse. Had he been tricked by the sleeper? Was this part of his revenge? Or was there another explanation for this terrifying predicament? Alone and afraid, Daniel knew that he had to find a way out. But with no tools and no hope for rescue, it seemed like his fate was sealed. Trapped beneath the cursed tomb, Daniel knew he needed a way out before it's too late. Will he escape the tomb before it's too late? Or will he become another victim of the sleeper's curse? Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting stories. The desert wind whipped around Daniel's tent, creating a low, mournful sound that seemed to seep into his bones. Inside, he sat hunched over his small, battery-powered tape recorder, his eyes fixed on the sand-covered device. It was an old one, a relic from a bygone era when archaeologists actually did fieldwork in the blazing heat, instead of just sitting in climate-controlled offices pushing papers across glass desks. But it had been worth preserving because of what it had recorded. Daniel had discovered it several weeks earlier, buried under layers of debris in the tomb of a long-forgotten pharaoh. The recorder had apparently been placed there as a final offering to the dead king, a way for him to take a piece of the modern world into the afterlife. And when Daniel had first pressed play, he heard the most extraordinary thing. A man speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes and running water. But there was something else in the recording, something that made the hair on the back of Daniel's neck stand on end. He had been listening to the recording again and again for days, trying to decipher the words, trying to understand their meaning. And now, as he listened, he thought he finally had it. Osiris, oh, Osiris. The voice on the tape was chanting, "Rise again, break the seals, claim your kingdom once more." And then the voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "The time is almost upon us, my brothers. Soon the hour of rebirth will strike. We must be ready." Daniel frowned. Was it possible? Could this forgotten pharaoh really have been onto something more than just burying treasure in the desert sands? The idea was preposterous, but the voice on the recording was so real, so full of urgency that Daniel found himself leaning forward in his chair, his heart pounding. But then the sound changed. There was a sudden blast of wind, like someone had opened the tent flap and let the desert wind rush in. Then silence. Daniel looked up, startled, and saw that the tent flap was still closed, the cords tightly secured. Had he imagined the sound? Was he going mad? He reached out to touch the recorder, and that's when he felt it. The cold. It started subtly at first, like a draft of air conditioning in the stifling heat of the Egyptian desert. But then it intensified until the air inside the tent was ice cold, so cold that frost began to form on the canvas roof. Then the sand started moving. At first it was just a slight tremor, like an earthquake far away. But then it grew stronger, shifting and rumbling like a subterranean avalanche. Daniel watched in horror as the sand piled up near his tent, forming a low mound that quickly became a small hill. Before he knew what was happening, the sand was rising around his tent like a wave, gulfing the poles and billowing over the top. In a panic, Daniel clambered to his feet and stumbled backward. But there was nowhere to go. The sand kept coming, pouring over his legs, up his body, until he was completely buried. He screamed, flailed, but it was no use. The sand held him fast. He was trapped. And then he saw it. Something big, dark, and menacing was pushing its way out of the sand. Something ancient and evil that had been stirring beneath the desert sands for millennia. The last thing Daniel saw before the darkness consumed him was a pair of glowing red eyes staring directly at him. When the sun rose the following morning, casting its golden light over the vast expanse of the Egyptian desert, it revealed a scene that made the local Bedouin believe the end of the world was nigh. All around the base of the lone pyramid where Daniel and his team had been excavating, the sand was disturbed, forming a large circle that stretched as far as the eye could see, and in the center of the circle was a single human footprint. It was a size 12, the same size as Daniel's, and it was the last footprint anyone had ever seen from him. His colleagues emerged from their tents to find them ransacked, their equipment smashed, their supplies strewn across the ground like confetti. Some of them had been writing in their journals the previous evening, and those journals were missing, along with the writers. In the ensuing chaos, a few footprints were found leading away from the camp and into the desert. They appeared to be heading north, towards the Valley of the Kings. The team leader, A wizened old professor with more than a few years of sand in his shovel stared at the tracks. "We have to report this to the authorities," he said grimly. "This isn't just a normal archaeological dig anymore. This is a disaster." As soon as the news broke, the site was swarmed by police and military. The place became a crime scene, cordoned off from the rest of the world. Everyone was questioned, every piece of evidence meticulously examined. But the truth was, there wasn't much to examine. The footprints in the sand had been washed away by the wind long before the authorities arrived. The footprints in the tents told them nothing useful, and whatever had happened to Daniel and his colleagues left no trace of DNA or other identifying information. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of Daniel or the others. They had literally vanished without a trace. The press had a field day with the story, churning out sensationalist articles that made the incident sound like something out of a Hollywood thriller. The theories ranged from the mundane to the downright ridiculous, with some people even blaming it on aliens. Meanwhile, the Egyptian government was less interested in finding Daniel than in covering up the incident. They were worried that the story was scaring away tourists, and tourists meant money. So they put pressure on the authorities to keep quiet about the case, to bury it deep in the recesses of the crime archives where it would never see the light of day again. But one person didn't want to let the case go. A young, ambitious journalist named Sarah Carter. She had been at the dig site the day Daniel disappeared, interviewing him for an article she was writing about the excavation. And while she hadn't gotten very far in her investigation, she had found something that the authorities had missed. It was a tiny piece of metal, no bigger than a fingernail, that she found lodged in the sand at the edge of the crater. It looked like a fragment of a hinge, something ornate and intricate. She took it home with her, intending to show it to her father, who was a retired archaeologist. That night, under the dim glow of her bedside lamp, Sarah showed the piece of metal to her father. "What do you think it is, Dad?" she asked. Her father studied it for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can't say for sure," he said slowly, "but I think this might be from a coffin." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "A coffin? What kind of coffin?" "An ancient Egyptian coffin," her father said, his eyes wide with sudden realization. "And not just any coffin, I think. This belonged to a very important person, someone who was incredibly wealthy." Sarah couldn't help but shiver. She had dismissed the idea of coffins in her investigation, assuming that if the police had found one, they would have mentioned it. But now, with her father's confirmation, she knew they hadn't. The question was, where was the coffin, and what had happened to Daniel? She returned to the dig site the next day, determined to find answers. She walked among the mounds of sand and gravel, her eyes scanning the ground, searching for anything out of place. The sun beat down on her shoulders, sweat trickling down her temples, but she didn't care. She wasn't going to give up until she found what she was looking for. And then she saw it, a glint of gold in the distance. She hurried over and knelt beside it, brushing away the sand to reveal a length of metal. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized what she had found. It was the corner of a coffin, sealed shut with molten gold, the edges intricately engraved with strange hieroglyphs. She brushed away more sand. The inscription became clearer. It read, "Who breaks the silence breaks the world." Sarah's blood ran cold. Was this what Daniel had heard in the recording? Was this coffin somehow connected to the cryptic message? And if so, what did it mean? With trembling hands, she pried open the lid and peered inside. There was a low moan from somewhere beneath the sand, and then the earth rumbled. Sarah screamed and scrambled back, but it was too late. The coffin had been disturbed, and whatever was inside was free. In the flickering light of her flashlight, Sarah saw a dark shape rising out of the coffin, taking on a human form. It was tall and emaciated, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. "Daniel?" she whispered, horrified. But it wasn't Daniel. His skin was a deathly pale white, his face gaunt and hollow. And as he stepped out of the coffin, Sarah noticed something else. His eyes weren't his. They were filled with a dark, soulless void that seemed to stare back at her, mocking her fear. "Who disturbs my slumber?" he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard, "shall join me in eternal darkness." And with that, he lunged. Now listen closely, for this is a tale that's best told in darkness, a story of grave robbing, of things best left undisturbed, and of a creature that slept for far too long. Our story begins in the year 1888 in the town of Oakhaven, nestled between rolling hills and thick woods that cloaked all who entered them in eternal gloom. It was here that Daniel March, a man possessed of an inquisitive mind and soul, took up residence in a small cottage on the edge of town. Far from the prying eyes of his neighbors and the memories that haunted him from his life before, he chose this isolation not for peace, but to be closer to his obsession. For in the graveyard just beyond his garden, beneath the cold, uncaring stare of the gibbet, there lay a tomb older than the town itself. It was an obelisk of black granite, bearing only a single word on one side, sleeper, and above it, a carving of a hooded figure that seemed to writhe like a creature disturbed in its slumber. And Daniel was determined to wake it. See, Daniel had come to Oakhaven seeking solace, or at least oblivion. For years his name had been synonymous with scandal. A writer whose lurid tales of the macabre and supernatural had earned him both fame and infamy. But now he wished only to be known as the caretaker of the graveyard, tending the earth and the dead. So he moved into the old shepherd's cottage, purchased the adjoining land, and set about building a wall around the graveyard. And soon, with the help of 2 hired laborers, the once neglected burial ground became his own private domain. He even built a shed on the edge of the property, filled with tools that would allow him to tunnel beneath the ground. All the while he wrote, not the lurid ghost stories that had made his name, but a journal detailing every aspect of his new life. He wrote of the changing seasons of his work in the graveyard and of the tomb. Want how he wrote of the tomb? For in the solitude of his cottage, by the flickering light of the hearth, he pored over ancient texts, pouring their contents into his journal, searching for anything that could tell him about the sleeper and how to awaken it. But there was little trace of the tomb's history. All he knew was that it stood where the Devil's Gap ran beneath the hill, a natural bridge that connected the worlds of the living and the dead. And so he began to believe that whatever lay within was something powerful, something evil, something that had been imprisoned there by the very forces of hell. And one night, he decided he would see it for himself. Now the tomb was larger on the inside than it had appeared on the outside. That was the first thing Daniel noted as he crawled through the opening. Now then he saw the coffin. It was made of a black stone he didn't recognize, smooth to the touch and unyielding. He rapped on it and listened to the hollow sound. No air came through the cracks in the sides. There was no scent, not of decay, nor of flowers, nothing but the smell of stale dirt. And as he stared at it, his journal slipping from his numb fingers, he felt something stir within him, a sensation that went beyond fear, something dark and ancient rising in his chest, beckoning to him. He needed to get out, to run away. But then he remembered the words carved into the granite sleeper. He was so close. What if it really was something powerful, something that could help him? Help him how? He wasn't sure, but he was desperate. His story was over. He had nothing left to lose. So he took a deep breath, steeled himself against the unseen presence that pressed against his mind, and he smashed the stone with the pickaxe. It cracked and split. He brought the pickaxe down again and again, adrenaline masking the ache in his arms as he destroyed the coffin. But it was not wood that gave way, nor metal that yielded to his blows. It was stone, smooth and unyielding, a stone that should have been impossible for him to break. But as he chipped away at the surface, something happened. A crack spread across the lid, and with a final heave, it broke free. Daniel looked down at it, surprised by the strength he found within himself. Then he reached out and touched the rough stone inside. But when he did, the whispers started. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering into his ears, coiling around his mind. Daniel, Daniel, let me out. Daniel, let me out. He tried to pull away, but they grew louder, screamed, trying to make sense of them, trying to stop them. But the words kept slithering in, wrapping around his thoughts like a shroud. Let me out, Daniel. Let me out. As he smashed the last of the stone from the lid, the whispers rose into a roar, and a shape began to form within. He stumbled back, knocking the journal from his hands, watching in disbelief as the form rose. Then it blinked. Its eyes were pools of darkness in a face that should have been carved in stone. Daniel screamed again and fell to his knees, scrambling back from the tomb. But the being stepped out of the coffin and approached him, its eyes boring into his soul. Daniel's screams died in his throat as it loomed over him, towering, its features shifting and swirling like smoke. Then it spoke. "Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for setting me free." And as it reached out to him, Daniel saw the answer to his prayers. The end of his story. Finally, he was not alone anymore. Do you feel something stirring within you? A dark presence awakening in the shadows of your mind? Are you drawn to it, compelled to embrace the secrets hidden beneath the veil of reality? Are you ready to delve deeper into the realm of the unseen, to confront the fears that lurk in the darkest corners of our world? If so, then I invite you to join me on a journey through the macabre and mysterious. Let us explore the chilling tales that will send shivers down your spine and the eerie mysteries that defy rational explanation. Together, we shall uncover the secrets that lie in wait, confronting the shadows that dwell in the depths of our collective unconscious. Will you heed the call? Will you dare to venture into the abyss and emerge with the knowledge that awaits? Or will you turn back, allowing the darkness to consume you whole? The choice, my friends, is yours. Embrace the shadows or flee while you still can. But remember, once you step into the light, there is no turning back.
Wow.
Years later, after Daniel's passing, his cottage was discovered, untouched since the day he vanished. And inside it, hidden beneath floorboards and loose stones, was his journal. The pages were filled with neat script detailing his life in Oakhaven, but the ink of the final entry shook, the words scrawled in a panic. "I am not me. I am what was waiting." On the next page, pressed between the leather covers, was a single dried flower, the same kind that had grown wild near the gibbet. Its petals were the color of rust, its center a gaping maw of deepest black. The townspeople spoke of the cottage in hushed tones, believing it cursed. They pulled down the wall around the graveyard, returning it to the town, and sealed the tomb once more, burying the flower beneath the stone. But the whispers persisted, slithering through the trees, licking at the ears of those who passed beneath the gibbet. Some swore they heard scratching from within the tomb, or saw the outline of a tall, gaunt figure standing at its foot, watching them with eyes like burning coals. And as the years turned to decades, and the memory of Daniel March faded, the echoes of his story remained, leaving listeners to wonder. Did Daniel's story ever truly end, or is the sleeper still moving through the world in another's skin?